Right. Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today we're going to be looking at something pretty fascinating.
Oh,
Yeah. It's how the land was divided up among the tribes of Israel. Like it talks about in Joshua chapter 19.
okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
But we're going to be taking it a step further, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're going to see how these ancient practices can actually offer some surprisingly relevant insights,
Yeah.
for like modern life.
That's interesting. It's amazing how stuff from like thousands of years ago can still, speak to us today.
Right. So let's set the stage here a bit. The book of Joshua describes how after the Israelites conquered Canaan, right,
Hmm.
well, they had to divide up the land, among the 12 tribes.
Right, right.
So by the time we get to chapter 19, there are 6 tribes left who need their inheritance.
Okay.
We get Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan.
Yep.
And what I find really fascinating is just how much detail goes into, describing these land allocations.
Yeah.
It's not just some vague, hey, you get the north, you get the south kind of thing.
No, not at all. It's almost like reading, like an ancient real estate document.
Totally.
There's specific boundaries, cities, landmarks. You really get a sense of how carefully, how meticulously they carried this whole thing out.
Wow.
Like, for example, Zebulun's territory is described as stretching all the way, towards the sea, encompassing places like Chisleth, Tabor, and Daberath.
Mm.
And Asher's portion, that extended up to Carmel, and it bordered the great city of Zidon.
Some of these names they sound so exotic.
Yeah.
Beth Markaboth, Shahazima, Ziklag. It's like we're stepping back in time.
Yeah.
Do any of these places have like a particular historical
I
significance?
was going to say, I bet you're wondering about that.
Yeah.
Have archaeologists, found anything at these sites?
Exactly.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, tons of archaeological discoveries have actually helped connect, the dots between the biblical narrative, you know what I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and then the actual physical evidence that was left behind.
Wow.
So some of these locations, they've been identified and excavated, and it's given us these glimpses into, the lives of the people who lived in these regions.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
So the text tells us that Simeon's inheritance, it wasn't a separate territory like the others.
Yeah.
It was actually located within, get this, within the land that was given to the tribe of Judah.
Huh.
Apparently, Judah's initial portion was just, deemed too much for them.
Interesting. That's a really interesting detail. It suggests that, even in this ancient system, this land division, there was this understanding, this need for, balance.
Oh, okay.
And a way to, adjust things based on what people needed,
So almost like a built-in system of like checks and balances.
Exactly. It highlights a really key principle that's just as important today as it was back then. The importance of, equitable distribution of resources.
Okay, so how does that principle, equitable distribution, play out in, the world today? We're not dividing up land anymore, but the concept, it still makes sense, right?
Oh, absolutely.
No.
It's not about physical territory anymore, but that principle of making sure things are fair, and preventing all the resources ending up with just a few. That's still so important.
Yeah.
Think about access to education,
Right.
healthcare,
Yeah.
or even just earning a living wage.
It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, exactly.
If we want everyone to thrive, have the opportunity to thrive, we need to make sure that everyone benefits.
I think that's what's really powerful here is that this isn't coming from, some modern political theory.
Right.
Or some economic model.
Right.
This is rooted in, like you said, something that's thousands of years old,
Yeah.
suggesting that this idea, fairness and balance has been recognized forever across cultures throughout history.
That's a great point. It makes you wonder if these are just fundamental human values that we keep rediscovering.
Yeah.
Speaking of fundamental values, the material we've been looking at, it also highlights another theme connected to this land division, cooperation over competition.
Yes. It's easy to imagine how dividing up a land, between 12 tribes, each one with its own history, their own priorities. It could have been a mess.
Oh, yeah.
Chaos, conflict.
No.
But the text, it really focuses on how they collaborated. They worked together, surveyed the land, and in the end, they came to a settlement that everyone accepted.
It just reminds me that even when, people disagree or there's rivalry, if they can cooperate, work together, you get a much better outcome.
Yeah.
for everyone.
Totally.
I mean, imagine what we could achieve if
Uh-huh.
we use this principle today,
Yeah.
for the big challenges we're facing.
Exactly. Like climate change,
You're right.
global
Oh,
poverty, international conflict. All of these need huge cooperation, massive scale cooperation. We need nations, organizations, individuals. Everyone needs to set aside their differences and work together.
this deep dive is seriously making me rethink, well, so many things.
Oh, yeah.
And there's one thing I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
The text mentions that, Joshua the leader, he didn't get his own inheritance until every tribe was settled.
I think that's significant.
Yeah.
It says a lot about his leadership. He wasn't trying to grab power or get the best land for himself. His priority was making sure everyone was taken care of, the whole community. He led by serving others, not by lording over them.
Such a refreshing concept, especially today,
Mm.
where leadership is so often about, dominance and self-promotion.
It's a good reminder that real leadership is about helping others, encouraging that feeling of shared purpose, putting everyone's needs first before your own.
Yeah. It's almost like a guide, a blueprint
Yeah.
for, ethical leadership, something we could really use more of these days. But speaking of blueprints,
Mm-hmm.
there's one more thing from this ancient land division that I thought was, well, really relevant for us today.
What's that?
This idea of, clear boundaries.
Oh yeah, the text, it talks about how each tribe's territory, it was like very clearly defined, no room for ambiguity or anything like that.
Right.
This wasn't about being restrictive or anything. It was about like creating order, shared responsibility. When everyone knows where they stand, literally and figuratively, there's less potential for conflict and misunderstanding.
Makes total sense. But it's
Yeah.
not just physical boundaries, is it?
No, not at all. This applies to like everything. Relationships,
Yeah.
work,
Wow.
even just like your own well-being,
Yeah.
Setting those boundaries helps you define your limits, protect your time and energy, and in the end, it helps you create healthier, more sustainable interactions.
I think a lot of people, myself included, struggle with setting boundary. Like, it can feel, I don't know, uncomfortable
Yeah.
or even selfish,
Yeah.
but you're saying it's actually really important.
Absolutely, yeah. Healthy boundaries, it's not about shutting people out or being like super rigid. It's about, telling people what you need clearly,
Yeah.
respecting what they need, and just creating that space where everyone can thrive,
Wow. This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. Who knew that a text about dividing up land could be so relevant, so helpful for today?
It really is amazing. These timeless principles, they just keep popping up, throughout history in different ways.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that we're all like part of this bigger human story,
Mm.
and that a lot of the challenges and opportunities that we face today, they've been faced before,
Yeah. I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. So listeners, we'll leave you with this. How could these principles, the ones we talked about today, equitable distribution, collaboration, servant leadership, clear boundaries, how could you use these in your own life? Maybe this ancient wisdom can give you some fresh perspectives and inspiration to create a more balanced, a more harmonious and fulfilling life. Thanks for joining us